Hey there everybody, thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be taking a look at a number of pieces, most of them in this series Mint by the artist Michael D. Kennedy. Michael Kennedy is someone that I got exposed to thanks to Partners and Sons when they sent along this copy of Mint and one of the grab bags I did with them. This totally blew my mind. I didn't know quite what to make about it, but I thought, man, this is a very, very powerful cartoonist and somebody who I want to know more about what they've done. So I finally had a chance to order everything that Michael Kennedy had available at his website. So 3 of the 5 issues of Mint, plus his book Mr. Hardy, which is a collection of short work from 2014 to 2020. Then Mint looks like what he was producing between then and now. Got a nice little note from Michael Kennedy in my package. Apparently he watches our videos, which is awesome. Thank you for that, Michael. He said he works to the videos, so that's great. And then he sent along the Mint and Mr. Hardy and a description of what they are. He says Mint was a zine with him playing with the comic form during the pandemic, trying to push his craft and also a foray into self-publishing. And then Mr. Hardy was the comics made through his 20s that aren't completely cringeworthy. Now, also, Michael was kind enough to release on Instagram, basically release publicly, and then sent a copy over to myself and Sean, a PDF of what he considers the completed Mint, which is nice because I'm missing issues 2 and 5, and in issues 2 and 5 is really where you get the meat of the context of the series that allowed me to make sense of it, and you'll see why without those 2 issues. This series wouldn't make as much sense. Another thing that's really interesting is Mint number 1 at least has been printed 3 different times. I have the 2nd and the 3rd editions, and they are wildly different books. So I don't know what was in number 1, and hardly anything that's in number 2, which is a lot of the material that I really initially liked, is in number 3 and is not in the PDF either. So I don't know. It seems like Michael Kennedy's making a lot of stuff and then curating together and kind of constantly picking at what he wants Mint to be. I don't know if there will be a collected edition. I would hope so. I would also, it's kind of a weird thing where as a fan you want to see all the material, but as an artist you want to respect another artist's kind of curatorial practice with their own work. But I like so much of the stuff in the 2nd edition of Mint that it's hard to go along with that. So anyways, I have a lot to go through here, but I think this is really worth it because what Michael Kennedy is doing as a cartoonist, and especially what he's done with Mint, is really phenomenal. Thankfully, I have the PDF, so I was able to screenshot some of the images from issues 2 and 5 to help flesh out my review of the series because I think it's really important. So Mr. Hardy are juvenile cartoons from 2014 to 2022 by Michael D. Kennedy. You just get a lot of experimentation. One of the things that immediately stuck out to me about Kennedy's work is that A, he's a master cartoonist, and B, is a cartoonist that's willing to play with style, play with technique, play with approach. And I find that very, very compelling. One thing that's really cool is across the different versions of this that I've got, you see some of the same imagery being reworked. So here, Baby Tales, the musical, this is something that was, done earlier in his career, something that's part of the Mr. Hardy, but also reappears in Mint colored. So there was something about this project, this comic, that Michael Kennedy felt resonated with the rest of what he was trying to say in Mint, and so he kept a piece and adapted it. And then, of course, me having 2 versions of Mint number 1, I've seen this a couple times. So that's part of what initially makes this hard to grab onto, is when you're looking at like the complete works as I can get a hold of it. You're seeing things repeated. So it's a bit like the kaleidoscopic approach that Tim Lane takes, which I really, really enjoyed, and I quite appreciate it here as well. It's not so pertinent to the Mr. Hardy because they're short stories, but you do see, and even at the end of this, Michael Kennedy talks about what he was doing here as he was trying to develop an idiosyncratic language. It especially seems like he's very interested in creating a language for black comics. comics by black creators that are obviously indebted to the history of comics. But I think Mint especially is an attempt to reclaim comics in a new way, or imagine a new black comics. And it seems like the work in Mr. Hardy was kind of the first attempt, and it seems like maybe an unknowing attempt, an artist just kind of doing a bunch of different stuff and looking back at it in compilation in the end and saying, oh, okay, I see what I was up to. So I think that's how Mr. Hardy functions really for Michael Kennedy. Is this is a young artist exploring, trying a bunch of different things, trying a bunch of styles, trying a bunch of different types of narratives, creating a bunch of different types of symbols for themselves. And then Mint is the kind of culmination of that. And so I'm going to be really curious to see where Michael Kennedy goes next. There's some really cool drawing in here. You can see the power of Kennedy as a draftsman. One, you get this kind of Egon Schiele, Gustav Klimt type of compositions and confidence in drawing. I also quite like the combination of pencil drawing and tone. I think that makes a very interesting look on the surface of the page. So Michael Kennedy is really experimenting with different kind of production styles. And again, here you can see this really big coarse grain tone with this dry brush or color pencil kind of look underneath it, and it makes for some really, really interesting textures. Here you get a piece called Negro Cowboy. This is, again, Michael Kennedy obviously looking at representation of black in media, and I'm assuming talking about the Mel Brooks Blazing Saddles movie. You see this show up in a later piece as well, colored. I think I have that tagged. And then in all of Michael Kennedy's books, you're oftentimes getting these one-off illustrations as well that at first kind of struck me as well, they're one-off illustrations. I don't really need to pay attention to them. But the further I get embedded into his work, the more I'm realizing oh, right here, this drawing of these characters, these are the main characters in Mint. And in Mint, they do play in a band together. So here you see the forming of the band for the first time. And then you do get a note in the back here about how Michael Kennedy sees this work, and as a collection of things where he's trying to figure something out and make a style for himself, or not a style, I shouldn't say, but basically now understands the parameters of the theme that he wants to investigate. So that leads us to Mint. I'm going to look at both of the first issues because they're really totally different books. And like I said, I'm not sure exactly what changed in Kennedy's mind as he was working on this to get him to so dramatically revise the book. One of the things I noted about the second edition is it's on really nice heavy paper, and that was something I liked when I originally looked at it. And then just the cartooning throughout is gorgeous. The colors and production throughout are amazing. We're introduced to Mad Lad, who's one of the main four characters that are part of the band. It takes quite a while to really get a sense of exactly what's going on in the series, but again, I think that's to its benefit. Here you see Negro Cowboy represented. It's got a couple extra panels and is in color. So Mad Boy, you get the sense, is a cartoonist, and these are some of his cartoons that he's making, I think, but he also becomes a bit of a character himself. Obviously, he's in a comic, so he becomes an iconic character himself. And you get these books, or these pages here, which I assume are supposed to be Mad Lad's cartoons. And within them, there's oftentimes criticisms of how blacks are represented in culture, different things like that. So you get a sense of this is a black cartoonist, the fictional black cartoonist working on fictional black cartoons. And that's where I say it seems like to some extent Michael Kennedy's doing a complete reevaluation of the history of cartooning. And then I'm not sure, I'll get into it more later, but it seems like he's projecting a fictional future, and I'm not quite sure what the nature of that future is supposed to be in terms of the racial dynamics of it, but I'll get into that more as we go. So here you see, again, you have Mad Lad, and you're getting introduced to this character here Blotty, which is like his dog, and Blotty's made out of this ink stuff. This is all supposedly produced by the Inky art department. Well, you see that more on this one. So the best I can tell is that this is a future world or an alternate world where either like society has reevaluated the way that minstrel characters were used in cartoons, and that they are always kind of racist characters of blacks, and that some kind of like society has been done in justice to some justice has been done in society to like make up for that problem, and now there's a history of black cartooning. Or maybe it's an alternate reality. I'm not quite sure. Or it's a future world where they're living in a VR, and the VR is either controlled by now a black population that's taken over, or a white population that's trying to fool the black population. I'm really not sure exactly how all that works. But there's an Inky corporation. They produce this drop here. This is one of their characters. That seems to be some very important thing. Obviously, it's related to ink, but I think it's related to blood, sweat, and tears, and a lot of other things as well as a symbol. The dog's obviously made out of it, and you start to learn that some of this stuff may be in the real world, and some of this stuff may just be occurring in a virtual reality. So it's very mixed up and non-linear in that way, but over time you start to get a sense of what's going on. Here's some more comics here. This one's called Putrefaction Sundays. You basically have these characters going through, and they're talking about, well, 2,000 years ago, the world had peaked in the relationships had between humans and their own media. Media? Yes, media. Take this farm we're on, for example. The farm would make corn that would be bought by a mega-rich firm who, in order to make humans purchase whatever corn or wheat products they made, created a series of things called media. It can be like songs, videos, paintings, that all convinces the human that this is corn or wheat. So you're definitely operating in the future, but you're never sure when you're reading a story like this that is someone in the future making a comic, and when this is actually a character within the actual timeline. You definitely get, and maybe that's why some of this stuff was thrown away. Maybe some of this stuff was thrown out as too different from the story. But there's a lot of this kind of reclaiming of comics, or showing what comics would be without the racist characters. So here you have Rachel's House. I've never read the comic that's being referenced here, Frank King's Gasoline Alley, but I'm assuming this is actually a character that was in it, a racist character of the maid. So here we've erased the racist character, but we're left with like her little towel, and then these characters are interacting with it here. And this is like what this house is, devoid of this character. So there is some kind of like reclamation project going on here, at least in this issue. There's also, I think these were things that were reasonable to be edited out. And again, I'm not sure if the suggestion is these are Mad Lads comics or if they're something else. But these are very interesting pieces. They're kind of just absurdist in nature. I'll go ahead and read. This is Lucky Time for Plenty. Swat the same grave as the schoolboy account about the soaring elder, man of science and fleet death, medieval reputation obscured in town. This was that absurd, dutiful, same man who served as diplomat. This uncle's untangling rivalry to his own nephew, sealed by the tales of suffocation of that virgin. So there's these weird, like, kind of beat poet nonsense stream of consciousness things throughout here that I just don't feel like I'm understanding, but that this is like building up kind of a picture of an alternate type of cartooning, I think, is what Michael Kennedy's doing. And then we get some of these sketches. This one here, a number of these, the runaway slave, cartoon of the cartoonist as a tree with this little weird little tree dick hanging out. These show up a number of times, so this seems to be really important to his thoughts on what Mint is. And then this is probably my favorite thing in the second edition of Mint that doesn't show up anywhere else that I've seen in the PDF or in number 3. This is dusting the old minstrel style of cartooning off. And I think this is really funny. I think Michael Kennedy is taking pot shots at artists like Dan Clowes and Chris Ware, who really obsess with, and Crumb, and all these people that have kind of this old timey obsession with early cartooning and the racist tropes that come with it, and ragtime and all that music. Like, I've definitely seen, you have a very, very Crumb looking drawing here. This reminds me a bit of Clowes's and Chris Ware's sketchbooks, things like that. So I think Michael Kennedy is taking a shot at those artists and accusing them of appropriation to some sense. He makes this statement here: comics history is so insistent on the blackface image being the sole one, to the point that any of the old comics that see print in this day and age rely on it. So an editor, and then you get all of these thoughts kind of breaking up into a sketch page. So I think that's a pretty direct shot, especially at Chris Ware, because I think Chris Ware does the most of this, but I'm not sure. And then you have a cartoonist note here at the end. The second edition omits some pages, notably the Duck Egg Blues pages. In their place, I've added some new pages. This edition is also slightly smaller, so I think the printing of it's smaller, and he's kind of apologizing for the lack of some of the original stories. Then we get what is, I'm assuming, the final form of Mint number 1, because this is the form that it is in the PDF that Michael Kennedy supplied to us. So a very different opening here. You just get 2 Mad Lad dailies right out the gate. So you have now, instead of opening with Mad Lad himself, you get open with cartoons supposedly by Mad Lad, about Mad Lad, I'm not sure. But they're happening in this place that's called the Safari. And the Safari looks quite a bit like the George Harriman Crazy Cat background and kind of style of rendering. Obviously, with Harriman being someone who was a mixed race and could pass as white, the history of black cartooning goes back at least that far. Michael Kennedy's acknowledging that and then just doing these cartoons. So in the Safari is definitely a virtual reality thing within this world. And they're asking, what is that thing riffing across Safari? That, my dear Mad Lad, is rotten data. Information, you dum-dum. User profiles, spam, email, and then it blows up. I guess they were warmly received. So you get that, that is part of the story, that these characters are interacting with this virtual Safari world, and that the cartoon minstrel characters are part of that somehow. Then you get some more of these one-offs here that are showing members of the band, and also some future tech, which I'll talk about. But you get these series of pinups. You're also learning about the different characters in the series. So this is one of the musicians in the band. This character is also like a superhero robot, maybe in a discarded timeline. Here you get this character. You see his cartoon form there. You learn about the rot, which is this ink stuff from Inky Corp that everything in this virtual space is made out of. It took me a long time to figure out how in the world this book was a sci-fi, because it keeps being advertised as a science fiction by Michael Kennedy. And it took me a while, because I was missing issues 2 and 4 at first, to see that this was happening in some kind of virtual reality, and to start forming this idea that maybe this was some kind of imagining of an alternate reality or some kind of future where the status of blacks has shifted somehow, but is still commenting on how our culture fails these days. So I think this here is the history of Inky, and you can see that there's a lot of kind of obtuse storytelling in here that really asks a lot of the viewers, and there's images like this that will show up quite later in the book. So it's very symbolically complex and like I said, non-linear and multifold, and you kind of have to be able to hold the whole thing in your head at once to really understand it all. And I really like that about this book. That's not a criticism, that's a praise of it. But I think this is showing like the collapse of a society and the erection of a new society, America. And I'm not sure all what's being said here, but I think what's being said is that people are basically just being turned into product, and the rot is what's being distilled from us, and that's what drives Inky Corp. So this may just be an extension of our world, I'm not sure. And then Inky Corp, here you have these black minstrel characters where now Michael Kennedy has basically forged or minted, as he describes in another issue. He's using the word mint to mean many, many different things, but also he's minting some new characters here, and you can see him making them basically. So I think that's what's going on in the opening scene here. You start to get some sense of how these characters interact, and also you get like some pot shots taken at comics. So here you have a character that's obviously devoted to comics, Honk If You Believer. He's drawn a comic here trying to use Blotty as a reference, even though he's not behaving, and then eventually just fails at selling comics at the same time that Blotty is becoming very popular on Instagram with 1 million viewers. So you get that kind of difference between the two mediums. Then you get these same sketches show back up, but now they're kind of like not opposite each other in the way they're mixed up in a different order. Then you get Mr. Skiffle here, which again, I don't know how he fits in totally, but you get the sense of like, if we take the caricature of black culture as it is now and extend out those concerns to their own cartoons, you get some of what these cartoons are. So like this character has these like special blow up air boots, you know, like the Nike Jordan that pumped up with air, and he's got this gigantic basketball, you know. So there's just things like that are like these extended sci-fi characters of what the culture now is seen as valuing. You get another one of these strips from earlier, now presented on its own. You get the Baby Tales the musical again in this one. So for some reason, this one is very, very important. You have a flute here, which is something a character plays later. I don't know how they all connect up. Then you get in this one, instead of shots at Clowes and Ware, you get shots at Hergé for doing Tintin in the Congo. So here you have Afrofuturist in the cartoon Congo, and you get some of the main characters from cartoons, I'm assuming, that all have racist black representation in them. And then this character is showing up, I think, in the Safari. Maybe what the Safari is where all of the black people have, it's like the ghetto that they've been relegated to in this future world. And this character is showing up as a white character to kind of, you know, go on a safari journey. Maybe that's what's going on in this future world. I'm not quite sure, again, of the mechanism. But it immediately pisses them off and gets shot in the face. Then you have Young Shaky Black Man, which has showed up in a few things. This is just like a kid being scared about getting beat up at the park, playing basketball. And again, kind of like these tropes of black culture, you know, the thugs at the park playing basketball. Here you have Piet Schwartz, a.k.a. Pierre Noir. I believe Pierre Noir is supposed to be some kind of robot character. Again, there's like an outtake from later, but this is Dream of an Afro Pessimist. This is a pretty surreal one. Don't know quite exactly what to make of that, but I do like the idea that this character is an actor here, acting in like this green screen suit, and then that in that way he's maybe showing up in the Safari. I also like, again, with this leaning into these tropes that kind of get overplayed, that this character is actually showing himself in the Safari world as something made entirely out of basketballs. And you can see him here interacting with the characters in the Safari world, I think. But I quite like this here where you have the hexagonal shape. Did I get that right? I don't know, whatever. The shape here that can be a cube and also be flattened out. I think that's used very well. And then here you have all of this that we just looked at as a comic that this woman's reading. So I don't know. Again, the levels of reality in here are a bit confusing, but that's okay. Then we have a Mint 1.5, which is a very nice little mini comic here. I like that Kennedy is playing with all these formats. This is published by the Inky Art Department. The year is 1963, and we get a lot of like abstract poetics of form stuff, which is very interesting. And you're dealing again with this the rot, and I think this is happening in Safari because this is, in that cartoon style. But this could just be some statement about systemic injustices and things like that. So you have, again, these very kind of abstract poetics of form comics, but then you get this little minstrel character here made out of the rot blobs, kind of in a centipede, and he goes crawling through these forms here, which are just donut, donut, coffee, coffee, jaywalking, speeding, and you realize that these are some kind of representation of police officers, this abstract thing. And I think what it's supposed to represent, this kind of reminds me of Andy Barron's Ohm and Jim Woodring. There's definitely some Jim Woodring in these things. I think maybe he's taken pot shots at Frank and Fran as well for possibly being racist characters. I'm not sure. But there's these things that I think represent like these big structures that we deal with. These, when they talk about systemic injustice or structural injustice, things like that. I think that they're talking about I think Michael's trying to say that these cops, when they all kind of come together, they all have these forms, and when they come together as a system of distributed responsibility, it's kind of an unassailable thing that they can operate within without suffering any guilt, because you can always just set responsibility on another party. I'm definitely way over interpreting here, I think, but that's what I took from this. And then there's this sequence here, and this is where I think maybe the world of Mint is in some future world where here you have the rot has now come out. The black character is basically referred to what I'm assuming is like a racist slur, and he gets mad and he starts speaking back, and he has the ink and the rot, and then here it says all cartoon minstrels are black. And so there's some kind of like at least reclamation of the history of comics through the representation of the characters, even though like not as many of the creators necessarily were back. I mean, he's referencing Harriman and stuff. He's kind of reclaiming the lineage of the characters, I think. It's just what the mechanism for that is in the future story. I'm not 100% clear, but I don't think it matters. So then we take a look here at on screen. I'll be taking a look at the stuff I was missing from Mint number 2. So in Mint number 2, you get exposed to a lot more of the characters. Right out the gate, you get introduced to this woman. I'm going to blank on her name, but she's introducing to us the idea of the safari for the first time, and talking about having this earbud here. And life as a full-time safari architect can be tough to get the right balance aesthetically. So this is someone who actually like builds the games or the environments that you could play in Safari. And that's talking about having old filters and stuff like that on there. So you start to get in number 2 here, you start to get a much better sense of the world that you're operating in. And when you see number 3, you'll see why when I only read them in physical form, I was pretty confused, because this sets up something actually really, really cool. Here you learn a little bit about the rot. So the Inky Group presents Applied Cartooning asks, what is rot and what does it do? As directed by Piet Schwartz. So now you have that Pierre Noir character from earlier is directing a movie or making a cartoon to show what rot is. So rot is mined via a complex system of innovative practices. Rot is the substance found in this newly annexed frontier we all know as the Safari surface. So the rot's like the essential thing that makes their VR game world work. Within that VR game world, you also find out that this character, her name's Yvonne, sorry, I forgot, but Yvonne has been put in, she's going into Safari, but has put into a temporary segregation zone until her family claims her. And you see this image here. There's a whole bunch of things that go on in front of this same stable image of like this tunnel here. But you see that she's basically been stuck in segregation, and at the end of it all, you have a character who's been hung there as well. Here's some of the other goings on that are going on in, I don't know if this is in the real world or in Safari, but I think Safari is the tunnel back there is the characters trapped in it. And here you can see another peek into Safari where Yvonne is going into Safari. These are a little mixed up, but she's going into the virtual world and getting in trouble. Then here we have a series of games that are supposedly designed by Yvonne, but maybe also Mr. Inky, where these are things that you can do inside of the virtual world. So you could exercise with Monty and Mr. Inky, and there you have Monty doing some like breakdancing and some yoga with the little Inky character. You have a game where you could pop all the balloons. So things like this at first just look like one-off sketch pages, and it takes a while to sort that these are actually games that you can play. And again, I like that, that it kind of looks like a collection of sketches and stuff, and it's asking a little bit of me. And then you have some very, very complex interactions over issues, which I'll show you when we get back to issue 3. But here you have Set a Trap for an Online Racist Troll, and just all of these interesting games. So then we come to issue number 3. And when I first got these in person, I was so confused about this because this is just like a sketchbook. And I thought, what in the hell is this? And then here it says Sketchbooks of the Inky Art Department, edited by the head archivist of IAD, which I'm assuming is the Inky Art Department. So in issue 3, really what you get is just what looks like Michael Kennedy's sketchbook. And I thought, well, what in the world are we doing here? Because we've basically got, I being sold a sci-fi comic, and then all of a sudden I just have this whole issue of sketchbook. And there's a lot of interesting things going on in it. There's like this composing around the grid here, which is something I've been doing for my book Bound that has just been a huge, huge compositional boon. I wish I would have done it earlier. So it's cool to see Michael Kennedy playing with composing on the grid, fitting everything in the grid and working that way. And obviously developing some interesting ideas. And then you get some of his characters here. Information passes from one node to another, and man remembers the whole discography of Digital Planets. So referencing a popular kind of underground hip-hop band, and the way that we can just transfer information from one node to another kind of mentally, it seems like. And then you get some sketches here that have a more Moebius vibe to them, and some more sketches here. And then you get these sketches that do line up with some of the imagery that's presented in the games. So disease, plague, and pestilence is spreading. These kind of structures right here of this, these people on the teeter-totter. There's ideas that are in these sketches that then show up in later episodes of Mint. And so what I didn't realize is, now coming back to the end of issue number 2, is that at the end of issue number 2, in either the real world or the virtual world of Safari, this O'Bruni AI comes up to Mad Lad, and Mad Lad wants to put his sketchbook file basically in the museum in the cloud. He said, here's my sketchbook file. I'd love to just use the O'Bruni AI and collaborate with the museum, mostly just for ideas. And so he's talking about giving over his art to the AI, basically, and how that's going to get repurposed. So I don't know when this issue was made, but I think it was made before because Mint number 3 came out in winter of 21. So this was before AI came out. But you basically have an artist feeding their work to the AI, and then the AI just like takes off with it. And this artist is saying, I never made a copy. No, wait, undo. And now he's trapped in there, and this thing has basically eaten his work. And now you see this character has been basically put into segregation. So he's now within the Safari, but basically locked up in his little box here. And another character breaks in and is talking to him and talking about how, because it is a virtual space, it is a fairly manipulable space, and so you can like have fun and reprogram in it. So that's issue 2, and you really get introduced to the Safari and the AI and all of this stuff. And then in issue 3, you basically get what I think is the stolen sketchbook. And I really, really like that. And it says right here, you know, this is sketchbooks of the Inky art department. So it's basically now been taken over by the corporation. We gave our ideas to the corporation, and now it's theirs. I like back here on the back cover, again, just selling the idea that this is a product from Inky Corporation. Inky Art Department's a subsidiary of the Inky Group Comics pamphlet, Black Atlantic Cartoon Futurism. And so, I don't know, and just the design of that's very, very cool. Then we get Mint number 4, which again goes back to some more stories, and here you see where it's being sold as science fiction again. And in this issue, we're basically introduced more to the idea of the safari, and you see these characters running around in the safari area. We get introduced to Monty, who again reminds me just some of, not the rendering style so much, but some of how this comic works here. Reminds me a bit of Jim Woodring. Like this drawing here seems very Jim Woodring. I think Michael Kennedy's a good enough artist with obviously a variety of styles that he can work in. I'm surprised he's not doing the Jim Woodring line. But the just kind of side-scrolling, silent nature of this with the weird abstractions speaks to me of Jim Woodring. And again, you're basically seeing this character being turned into the minstrel character. You're kind of getting maybe the origin of this minstrel Inky character right here. And then the Safari Hunter guy says, another lost user deceased within the endless matrix of virtual play spaces known as Safari. Mr. Inky, forgive me. But then the user gets reborn here. So this is someone within the Safari system. And then here you get this little inserted mini comic, which I love. I love these little inserts, totally hand folded and stuff, really cool. But you get an explanation of what is mint. And this character goes through all of the different meanings of the word mint, and they all pretty much apply to the comic, whether it be, related to currency, related to like minting something, creating something for the first time, the British slang for something truly good, like that's mint, that is. So there's a lot of that. And then he suggests that mint is also an acronym for something, and that no one knows what it is, that the meaning of mint has now become obsolete. And then here at the end, he says, that which cannot, like the exact shade of mint, cannot or rarely ever be seen, the nigrotudinal topologies of the Inky group. And that's where I think, again, Michael Kennedy's making a statement about what he's trying to do with mint, is trying to create a topology of, like nigrotudinal minstrels throughout comics history or something, and that they're existing within this world. I'm not so sure. I hope we get to talk to Michael, because I would really like to know. I'm assuming we'll be able to make that happen given the notes he sent and stuff. And then he also puts a note here saying that this is Pan-African kitsch, you dick. So he's kind of like saying, he's kind of terming his own product there a little bit. And then we get into, again, thanks Michael so much for sending over the PDF, because I wouldn't have known how this all wrapped up. So in issue number 5, you get the conclusion of Mint, and it's split into 2 suites. Black Atlantic Cartoon Futurism, which is a song that's been referenced in other places in the series. And then Suite 2 is King of the Safari Blues and Other Stories, which is a series of short, like comic strips that are kind of collected to make a larger story. So starting with the Black Atlantic Cartoon Futurism, again, you just get some of this type of like wild imagery here that obviously has a basis in other things. Like some of this stuff reminds me of Los Bros Hernandez, the way they'll stop on just like a stop sign or something, a light, things like that. But again, investing it with or injecting it with these tropes of like current black culture. So again, you have these cloud shoes that they're walking on here. You get the pyramids, and then you get Mad Boy here, and this is Yvonne, I believe. So they're in a band together in the real world, and so here you see Mad Lad hooked into the Inky Safari system here. He's got his headset on and is drooling. And you can tell that she's yelling at Mad Lad because she's yelling at him with the Mad Lad character. So I really like that as well. I like all of these little cartooning in the bubbles. There's just a real understanding and use of comics throughout all of this. These beautiful abstractions, celebration of actual ink textures. It's symbolically, I'm not sure I 100% understand what all this adds up to, but I believe that these are the translations that the characters are going through. So this is like a cue, basically. This is Yvonne in real life, and then you kind of translate her through ink to this. So this is being translated into Safari. This is the minstrel character. We've already seen him. I forget his name, but a real world character. And he's turned into just ink drops, I guess. Here's Mad Lad. This is being turned into a hand. I don't know who this character is by name, but she's turned into a duck in the Safari. So there's a lot of things like that where you could really just spend a lot of time unpacking it. Here is all of these characters drawn more realistically. You can see the members of the band together. There's the drummer, this weird stand-up bass thing, this banjo here. So all of these things that seem like kind of one-off illustrations actually do have a place within the kaleidoscope that is this book. And then you get the second part of the book, which is a bunch of these short cartoons, and you could tell they're meant as daily strips because they always have this inky drop at the end to end them, but they also hold together. So in this you start to get a sense of, I think, the final kind of political point that Michael Kennedy wants to make. And again, the point's not solid. Kennedy, as you can see with the project, is a very slippery artist and slippery thinker. I don't think he wants to be locked down to any one viewpoint. And so I have a hard time extracting exactly what he's trying to say out of here. But there's definitely this feeling that none of the answers that we're currently being given suffice. And that's where the futurism comes from. So here we're talking about cartoon minstrels again. This character plays a song, and it comes out as this Black Shadow character. He's the anti-Mad Lad, and they bring in Monty, who's this inky character here, and he's a cartoon minstrel just like you. And well, he says he's in immense agony and needs to be euthanized because he's basically the representation of this character's blues. So again, this idea of the black minstrels in cartoons. And then he starts to get more political. Punky, I once was a progressive. Wow, you must have sold your soul to the devil. Didn't you know the atheist left sells their art to the liberals and their soul to the mortgage lenders? Children, you've inspired me. I am progressive yet again. Now set up some cameras for me. I'm going to lay an egg radically. So going after progressives, basically for being performative. That he's like, I'll do performance artist, email the gallery. And then, why are you telling people you're progressive? You frequently lobby to have Mad Lad deported. Well, yes, I'm being progressive, I am. I'm silencing the anarchists versus democratic means. So you do get a sense that Michael Kennedy's probably aligned with anarchism in some sense, at least in the sense that none of the current systems are working for us, so we need to revisit them. Here you get that kind of same image of the factories and the cookie cutter houses from before. And there's basically almost like a socialist Russia where everyone's living in the same every cookie cutter thing. I guess consumerist America is not much better in terms of the cookie cutter. But this announcement, today's main news is the Radical Workers Pamphlet Mint has as of today ceased all of its operations, cementing mint and inky history. So now the book that you're actually holding is potentially an artifact from within the story or from within the story that is Safari, and Lord knows how many other levels deep there are. You also get this kind of clay stuff here. This is the O'Bruni and AI, and it's teaching a masterclass in sculpture. So they're using inky clay. I'm assuming this is some kind of virtual clay that they're using in a headset space. And I really, really like here that the two people are given the same starting point. And Michael Kennedy shows the steps 1, 2, 3, 4 through 8 of sculpting a face, and then on the other track you get someone doing A, B, C, D, and they sculpt some pots and then eventually a flute. That same flute, I think, that was being used. So I don't know what that symbolism means, but it's there. And I like this just two different views of the world. One that's A, B, C, D, one that's 1, 2, 3, and they both lead to very different things. That's just kind of showing subjectivity to me. And then here you get, again, a reference back to the O'Bruney AI, and Mad Lad is saying, oh, I hate the O'Bruneys. One stole my idea notebook. I told Inky's helpline they can't arrest him unless the O'Bruneys patent one of my good ideas. Want to hear one of them? Here you get another kind of what seems to be a series of pot shots at just the way politics and discussion about politics currently goes on. So Lovelace has become, quote, toxic. I respect your lefty ideals, so I'll be gentle. I can put him in segregation. I can give him a verbal warning. And then Mad Lad's like, nah, just shoot him. So poking fun at a lot of different things there. And then here we have a character saying, I reviewed your only song, Black Atlantic Cartoon Futurism. So that's apparently the story that we read in the first half of issue 5 is an illustration of this song. And it was strong, but in dire need of percussion. It lacked any hint of real futurism. I hated it. Here we have a halt. President L. Palm demands you hand over the duck. So that's the character who's represented as a duck, mainly so we can cancel her in the name of the Republic. I guess we ought to impeach the President Palm. Yeah. So it's just got that real kind of skepticism about the way that all political discourse these days goes. And then the way the whole series pretty much finishes is explanation by Michael Kennedy, I think, of what his hopes for the future are. Futurism of the saying, I choose to retire here for, enshrined in empathy, organization, play, and love, the rarest consequence of this virtual world. Isn't it just sublime, my neighbor? Cartoonishly so. And so he's obviously saying that, like, this is what he hopes for the future, but also that it's kind of cartoonishly utopian in its ideals, I think, is an acknowledgement that he's making. So I feel like this is a very kind of thoughtful, philosophically thoughtful, and politically thoughtful piece that doesn't exactly say anything specific about where it's aligned, even though all throughout you're getting lots of hints what the alignments are and what the concerns are. But I don't think there's any beat me over the head cartoonishly simple message in the end, and that is way to the benefit of the book, that through all of these kind of different layers of reality, these different styles, these different ways that these characters kind of manifest in these different stories, I think you're getting a really new, different type of nonlinear storytelling, which is really well suited for discussing things that don't have a clear answer, things that have positive and negatives on all sides, complex histories and things like that. I think Michael Kennedy has found really a perfect format for talking about these things very explicitly without just feeling like he's beating you over the head with a political treatise. And that's really, really well handled. And then to couch it within this sci-fi that doesn't even feel like a sci-fi until you start to unpack it is also really, really nice, because that just further destabilizes any kind of sense that you have about what this narrative is actually trying to tell you. And it also just leaves it open for the reader to insert their own selves into it in a way that, what someone comes away with from their interpretation of this project, my own included, probably says a little bit more about that person than about whatever Michael Kennedy was saying. So it's really great, because it's one of those things where you have a core that the artist is orbiting around, but they're pointing at the core, but the book isn't the core itself. And I think that's the best kind of art. And then at the end here, you get some deleted scenes at the end of or at least at the end of the PDF I got. I don't know if this is actually in the print version of number 5, but this is from an abandoned Afrofuturist superhero comic about the origins of Pierre Noir, who's apparently a robot. And you can see the style play again here, taking on some kind of very Moebius mark making, a lot more dynamic superheroics type of imagery. And there's a lot of that in there. And I really love here the superhero imagery of this character falling down, and he's got this afro almost, as his hair is a propeller, and then he lands and the hair kind of like Medusa or something tightens itself up into a really nice like hairdo there. So that's at the end at least of the PDF I got. I don't know if it's in number 5, but it gives you a sense of the kind of multifold storytelling that Michael Kennedy is involved in, because you don't know, is Pierre Noir actually a robot in the real world and he's part of this band, and then he also goes into the Safari, or is he only a robot in the Safari, or is he a comic is this a comic that the Mad Lad character's making based on someone he knows in real life who's in his band? I don't know. Like, those kind of relationships remain obscured. And I think, there's certain projects I would complain about an artist not being clear or not having a plan. In this case, I very much feel like Michael Kennedy knows exactly how all of these things interrelate. He just doesn't feel any need to explain them to an intelligent audience, which is obviously what he's assuming his audience is. So I really appreciate that. I really appreciate this book. I think Michael Kennedy is one of the most exciting. Like Everett Glenn and Michael Kennedy are two people I think are kind of using this same weird kaleidoscope remediation thing in their work. And him, Gareth Brooks, who's playing with media, I put him in that category of people that I'm really watching. Banu Pratap, people that I think are basically sculpting the future of the medium, and I really think Michael Kennedy is one of those people. So definitely, I don't know, because I wasn't even able to get a hold of everything, but you can go to Michael Kennedy's Instagram. I'll put a link, and he's been giving this away for free. So definitely go get yourself the PDF, order what you can, and support Michael Kennedy so he'll keep making more comics, because, like I said, this is someone who should have a huge impact on the future of the medium if they're able to keep working. So please support this artist. I think we'll all benefit from it. It's translated by Ryan Holmberg and is very large for a manga, so that's a really cool feature of this book, this standard manga size. And this is just a 200 some odd page representation of what Yokoyama Yuichi thinks of the Carnival parade, and he's just made this like relentlessly loud and rhythmic book that pushes all kinds of amazing boundaries of what comics and manga are, and we could not recommend this book more.